This time over here between Pesach and Shavuos is of incredible significance. This is the time when the talmidim, Rebbi Akiva's 24,000 students died. The Torah writes in Siman Tov Sadi Gimel that the custom is in all places not to have weddings, not to get married between Pesach and Shavuos. The reason is, says the Torah, shel laharbos b'simcha, not to have too much happiness, because at this time the talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died. And there are some places as well where they don't get a haircut. That, of course, is our custom as well. The Shulchan Aruch over there rules this way as well, because they died. This is based on a Gemara in Yevamos on Samach Beis and Beis that says Shnayim Asar Elav Zugim Talmidim Hayiloli Rabbi Akiva Megivas Vad Antifros, that there were 12,000 groups of pairs of two. Why didn't the Gemara just say 24,000? Why did it say two pairs of 12,000? Okay. Could be because he split up his learning with 12 years when he went back. Okay, it's explanations. And he had 12,000, and the Gemara specifies the locations for some reason as well. The Kula Mesa Beperek Echad, they all died during the same time period, because they didn't honor one another. Question: if you don't honor someone, even if you're at an incredibly high level, so now you're liable for the death penalty? That is the main question that we need to understand. Many people know this Gemara, know this idea, but they have no clue what the explanation is. And the world was desolate. The world was desolate, it was destroyed until Rabbi Akiva came along, and then he taught another 5 talmidim. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon. Some say Stam Rabbi Shimon is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Shemua. This itself is another Torah that we're going to need to spend time and focus on another time. This idea of not giving up, even at such an old age. Rabbi Akiva was at the youngest possible age then, because he was 40 when he started learning, 24 years, do the math. He was no less than 64 years old, and just at 24,000 talmidim dying, he still taught the world. Can still continue. V'heim says the Gemara, Heimidu Torah Yisashah, and those group of 5, those 5 students Rabbi Akiva then taught, they caused the Torah to continue to exist. Tana kulam memesu mepesach laraseres, and the Gemara concludes by saying they all died from Pesach until Shavuos. So, question: if they died then, so then why are we celebrating Lag BaOmer? They were still dying. Number one. Number two is if you hold that the Gemara says that they still died, so how could you either hold the first set of the Sphira or the last set if they were still dying? All right, we'll come back to that. Also, how do we reconcile this with the Ramban and the Rabbeinu Bachai, which we're going to learn about another time, that says that the days in between Pesach and Shavuos are considered a Chol HaMoed? Is it a Chol HaMoed, a happy time, or is it a sad time? All right, we'll come back to that. So that's what we see from this Gemara over here. The Lavush adds over there in Tov Sadi Gimel, Umisavlin Aleihem, that there's an Avelus over here, that this is a period of mourning. That's what the Lavush says. He writes that every single Shabbos between Pesach and Shavuos, we say Avarachamim right before Musaf. Why? To remember the neshamos, these souls of the talmidim of Rebbi Akiva. So this is a time of Avelus. We have to reconcile, of course, the Rabbeinu Bachai and the Ramban, that it's a time of Chol HaMoed. Fine.
Why the Gemara doesn't bring down any sense of Avelus whatsoever?
Right. Why didn't the Gemara explicitly say Avelus? Okay, it could be, it's implied.
We don't see anything before the Torah, do we?
But that said that it was Avelus? I mean, the Lavush was the one that specified the Avelus. The Torah said not Simcha, but that's a simple explanation. The Lavush is after the Torah, correct. They're all defining and explaining the intention of the Gemara. That's what it is. It's a time of Avelus. It's a time we should. Okay, you have to look at it from a historic perspective. Okay, this is what to talk about there. All right, what to look into there from a historic perspective. But okay, now the question over here is what's going on over here. Why specifically did the chachamim, did the rabbis come along and establish for all future generations an official mourning period for many weeks over this catastrophe, over this calamity? Do we find this by other great, righteous, pious people, tzaddikim? Even though, yes, we're not disagreeing, it's an incredible tragedy. Nevertheless, that we don't find There were many decrees throughout our long history, and there are many people who were brutally tortured and murdered, and yet there's no official mourning period that was established. So why then is there an official established mourning period? Yes, granted, there were scholars, great rabbis, great people, but there were many cases and instances throughout history, and yet nothing's established. What is unique? What is special about this event in Jewish history? That's the question that we're going to deal with over here. Furthermore, we can ask another question over here. Why did they get such a severe punishment just because they didn't honor one another? Furthermore, the Gemara says that they died with one of the worst deaths, askara, type of choking. So if you're not going to give respect to someone, so we understand the Gemara in Brachos Alam and Aleph Amid Beis, Kol Amora Halacha B'fnei Rabbi Chai. Whoever rules a halacha, whoever makes a halachic ruling in front of their Rebbe is liable for death. But over here, we're not talking about a rabbi. We're talking about that the Gemara said they didn't give one another honor, one another respect. So why then are they liable for the death over here? The Gemara in Shabbos on Kuf Yotesima Beis quotes Rabbi Yehuda, who says Yerushalayim was only destroyed because they because they disgraced the scholars. That's what the Gemara over there says, right? So the question is, that's talking about a Talmud Chacham. Over here, we're talking about talmidim, students, talmidim of Rebbi Akiva. So why were they punished so severely? Let's get into the answer. Rabbi Olshin in his Yerucham Olshin and Maimer Yud Aleph over here on the Shvuah section, he has a beautiful idea, and he begins by quoting Rabbi Aharon Kotler, who says that Rebbi Akiva is the yesod of Torah shebeal peh. Rabbi Akiva is the foundation of the oral Torah. He's the foundation of it. Actually, if you want to dig a little deeper over here, the pre-Tzaddik already quotes in the Arizal this idea. So comes Rabbi Kotler and explains these talmidim, heim shal yodam haisa hamasiro de Torah shebeal peh l'doros. These talmidim over here, we're going to be the future leaders. These are the individuals who are going to transfer the Torah for future generations. Like we say in the beginning of Pirkei Avos, that there's a chain. These talmidim are a major link in the chain of transmitting the Torah. Meilim Kain, consequently, they have to be completely wholesome, complete, with all of the 48 ways to acquire the Torah. It says in the 6th parak of Pirkei Avos that there are 48 ways to acquire the Torah. And when one of the ways is lacking, so now we're lacking in ways to acquire the Torah. They were lacking in something called dibuk chaverim, which literally means attaching to friends. That's what they were lacking in, attaching to friends. Let's just get a little background information exactly of what we're dealing with. It says over here towards the middle of the 6th parak in Pirkei Avos, it says over here that Torah is greater than kahuna and than malchus. And it continues and says, because Torah is acquired, hatorah niknis ba'arba'im u'shmona dvarim, in 48 ways. In the Gemara, it's in the 6th parak over here in Avos, it says, bedikduk chaverim is one of them. Dikduk chaverim. Analysis with friends. What does this mean over here? This means that when a person learns Torah, he has to analyze it properly. He has to go through it properly. And the friends, they have to be used. Right? There's also another one, pilpul chaverim. Right? The pilpul talmidim is the next line. A give and take with friends. When you discuss ideas with other colleagues, you gain more clarity. And this is one of the conditions and prerequisites that's needed. Diktu chaverim, by the way, analysis with friends. Rashi translates 2 words. Loimed bechabura. You learn in a group. That's what Rashi says. When you learn in a group, you get clarity. And that's one of the 48 ways to acquire the Torah. The next Rashi on Pilpul al Talmidim says, that you have a give and take back with your friends and your colleagues. You analyze what you learned. And also the Gemara in Tainis Daf Zayin says, talmedai yosim mekulam. You learn a lot from your friends. That's the idea. So those are two of the 48 ways. We'll come back to some of the other ways as we continue learning about them, maybe in another session. So let's leave it at that for now. Right over here, you see? Dikduk chaverim pilpul talmidim. Here are the Rashis. That's right. Back to back. So we see that over here comes Rabbi Kotler and explains that they were lacking. He actually calls it dibuk chaverim. There could be different texts. Okay, this text that I have says dikduk chaverim. In other words, the Torah isn't complete and isn't completely proper if it's lacking that. And therefore they were unfit to be people who would transmit the Torah to the next generation. So there was considered, it was chaser be'esem hatorah de lahaisa b'mlo Torah rasa. There was considered a lack in the actual Torah because it wasn't completely pure. Umesiros hatorah shebeal peh ledoros haisasricha liyos Torah shlema b'kol inyana. And when it comes to transmitting the Torah to the next generation, it needs to be in a completely wholesome manner. And therefore, they weren't zoicha, they didn't merit being the people who would transfer the Torah. That's the idea over here. Obvious question on this is, you meet to tell me, but because such as a small nuance, a small detail and side point, that's considered such a big lack, to the extent that now they're not going to be able to transmit the Torah to the next generation, and to the degree that now you're going to kill 24,000 talmidim, Hashem is going to kill 24,000 great people, and to the extent that the Gemara says that the entire world was shamim, was completely desolate. What's the explanation over here? How could we explain this? The Gemara in Baba Metzia on Pei Hey Amid Beis relates that Rabbi Akiva told Rabbi Chanina. Just say it over in Hebrew because it's tough Aramaic. Rabbi Akiva, he said he's going to do something that will cause the Torah not to get forgotten from all the Jews. He's going to go and he's going to make flax, plant flax. From the flax, after it's grown, he's going to make nets. From the nets, he's going to catch animals. From the animals, he's going to use the animals to feed orphans. From the skin of the animals, he's going to use it for parchment, for cloth. And on the cloth, on the parchment, he's going to write the Torah. And then he's going to write the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. And then he's going to go and he's going to teach Torah to children. And through that, he will cause the Torah not to get forgotten. And regarding that, the Gemara says, Rebbe says, Kama gedolim ma'asechia. Rabbi Chanina said about Rebbi Akiva, how great are the acts of Rebbi Akiva on that statement? Why does he need to do all of that? Waste his time planting the seeds, turning it into nets, doing all of this. Just cut to the chase. Just buy it from the marketplace, from a sofer who wrote a Torah, and then teach it from that Torah. What do you got to go through this whole process? The Marsha over there explains in Baba Metzia. This whole story teaches us Shekol Ma'isa Hazel L'Torah Hu B'Tchila L'Shem Shamayim. This teaches us that every single step in the process of us learning Torah has to be without ulterior motives. It has to be for the sake of heaven. It has to be lishma. Every single step in the process that we take to learn Torah and in the ladder that we climb up, every single rung that we take in that ladder has to be l'shem shamayim, for the right reason. V'lo haya bo shum. I think the word is altruistic motive. I think
Ulterior motives?
Yeah, ulterior motive. No, there's another word. I just had it the other day, actually.
Altruistic.
Yeah, there was a word. I just had it and then I typed it up somewhere. All right. Anyways, yeah. Anyways, so the idea over here is that what? The entire step, the entire process has to be for the right reasons. Have nothing attached to it that isn't l'shem shamayim, for the sake of.
altruistic.
Yeah. So the idea over here is that in order not to forget the Torah to cause the Torah to get forgotten from the Jews, it has to be done in a completely pure manner. And only through that the Torah could be able to get fulfilled and not forgotten. And therefore, Rebbi Akiva was ever so careful that every single part of the preparation in the process of transmitting the Torah would be for the sake of heaven, without any tarubos kavana acheres klal, with any mixture of any bad intention at all in the rest of the process. And therefore, he burdened himself with his own hands to find the chumashim, to every single process to make the Torah from the beginning so it was completely pure and holy in every single step of the process in order to teach it. And only in that way the Torah wouldn't get forgotten. So we see from over here that in order to guard the Torah, that it will not get forgotten, it needs to be completely pure. That being so, and applying it, that it needs to be pure, that's why these talmidim of Rebbi Akiva were not fit to transmit the Torah to the next generation. Since they didn't act towards one another with honor, with respect, they didn't grant the proper honor, whatever that means, we're going to have to come back to that as well. Therefore, it's considered a chisaron, it's considered a lack according to their level in the shleimus of the kinyonim b'Torah, in the completeness of acquiring the Torah. And therefore, the entire world was desolate, and Rebbi Akiva needed to then start again with new talmidim, that through that the Torah would get transferred. But the question is, why from this did they get such a bad punishment? The death and all of this. What's the explanation? Why did they get death? Pretty severe over here. So he has another 3 pages over here where he discusses the importance of the Rebbe-Talmud relationship and a mesorah in general. Mesorah means that we have a tradition, and we have to keep to that tradition. And then after talking about those ideas, he says that just like someone who paskens halacha in front of his Rebbe in a disrespectful manner, and he makes halachic rulings in front of his Rebbe, and someone who disgraces a Talmid Chacham would be liable for death because he's being mavatel, that individual is nullifying the mesorah of Torah, the tradition that we have in Torah. We have traditions that we hold of and that we're very careful not to break in any way, shape, or form. And this is the yesod, this is the foundation of the fulfillment of the Torah. So therefore, these students, these talmidim that Rebbi Akiva had, who were destined to be the hemshach, the continuation, continue this mesorah of Torah for all future generations, their acts caused a hefsek in the hishtalshalus mesorah Torah. Their act caused an interruption in this chain of the traditions of the Torah to the next generation. That through them not honoring one another, the Torah wasn't complete. And therefore, it wasn't completely pure as it should be, appropriately, as it's fitting to be, to go from one generation to the next. And this is what caused, not only that, but through their acts that they didn't honor one another, that caused a decrease in the honoring of talmidei chachamim, of scholars in general, in that generation. Now, even though they weren't outright disgracing the talmidei chachamim, nevertheless, since among the talmidim of Rebbi Akiva, who, remember, were the mesorah Torah, the people who were fit to transmit the Torah, they didn't give each other honor according to the level that they should have. So because of that, that caused a negative ripple effect as a result, and in general, people in that generation weren't honoring Torah. And through that, there became a pagam, there was a blemish in the mesorah Torah, in the traditions of the Torah, and transferring it over. And therefore, they were obligated such a severe punishment because they severed that chain of connection of the traditions of the Torah that was already transferred from Har Sinai up until that point. Over here, we see an important idea. This is a deep idea to think about. The idea being that we see the people, the B'nai Torah, who are learning properly, if they're going to be lax with something, the whole generation is going to get negatively affected. So they have to be very careful, to be serious in all areas. Based on this, we could return and explain what we had originally discussed, why it's a period of mourning for all future generations. What's the idea over here? What about for other righteous and pious people? Why is there no mourning for them? The mourning for the death of these talmidim is unlike a typical mourning for a person's loved one or a relative in any way, shape, or form. This isn't just mourning over the death of physical bodies over here. This mourning is established because of a destruction of bittul mesoras hatorah b'Yisrael. This is mourning over the fact and concept that there was a destruction of the concept of transmitting the Torah. The transmitting of Torah was destroyed temporarily at that time. And that's what we're mourning about. Because these talmidim of Rebbi Akiva were destined, as we said before, to be the individuals to transfer the Torah to the next generation. And if they would have granted one another the proper honor that they deserved, and they would have been complete in all 48 ways to acquire the Torah, then the Torah would have been transmitted to the next generation afterwards, easily. However, now that they didn't grant one another the proper honor, now they were all liable to die. They were all chayv misa. And it stopped from there, the transmitting of the Torah, to the extent that the entire world became desolate. And therefore, that's why we have to mourn. We're mourning over the fact that now we lost that transmitting of the Torah. Rabbi Aharon Kotler explains the great catastrophe of losing that transmitting of the Torah and just forgetting the Torah in general. And he writes, Shechas haTorah hu ha'asan hayoser chamer l'klal Yisrael yoser mikol ha'chorbanos v'hagaluyos. Forgetting the Torah is the biggest catastrophe and calamity that could happen to the Jewish people, more than any destruction and exile. And the pasuk says in Dvarim in Dalet Tes, Yishamar l'cha v'shamor nafshecha moed pein tishkach es ha'dvarim. Be very careful. Be careful in your soul not to forget these words, not to forget the Torah. And Chazal teach us in the third parak of Avos, Hashoicheach davar echad mishnasol ma'ale alav akasav kilu meschai benafshos, and Mishnah and Pirkei Avos. If you forget one thing that you learned, you're liable to die. They talk about nowadays that doesn't apply because our Torah is written, but still we see how bad it is to forget the Torah, because back then, if you would have forgotten something and it wasn't written down, so now the rest of the world might never know that again. If you were someone who was going to be the person to transfer the Torah, remember back then, there were much, qualitatively, the learning was much better. Quantitatively, though, there were less people learning than ever, so the people who were learning, who really knew it, had a tremendous responsibility. Wasn't written down back then. Torah shebeal peh, the oral Torah, was actually oral. We don't find another type of warning like this for forgetting the Torah, because it's life. It's very important. Every single individual has to be careful about this. There's nothing that damages the fulfillment more than this. According to this, we could explain that the bittul of the mesorah, the nullification of this transmitting of the Torah, is considered shechas haTorah. It's considered as if the Torah was forgotten to some degree. Because the fulfillment of Torah among Klal Yisrael, the Torah only gets fulfilled and remembered through mesorah, from Rebbe to Talmud, through transmitting the Torah from a Rebbe to a Talmud. By the way, it's the same thing. When a person learns a sefer, that's considered part of the mesorah as well. Rebbe to Talmud. So if Chash v'Shalom is going to be a bittul, that this transmitting of the Torah is going to be canceled. So now you simultaneously being canceled, the fulfillment of the Torah among Klal Yisrael, among the Jewish people. And therefore it makes sense to establish a mourning period because of the lack of the transmitting of the Torah that we had by the talmidim Rebbi Akiva, because it's a tremendous catastrophe, more than any other destruction or exile. Now we can understand this avoda, what we have to contemplate and think about during this time period. Not just that it's uncomfortable that we have to grow our hair longer, that we can't trim our beard, that we can't listen to good music. Not only of those that we can't attend a wedding or make a wedding. You could attend if someone holds other days. You could go, but in the middle you can't when it's both. But what is this about? One of the ideas of what this is about is we're not just talking about that we're mourning death over here. We are mourning a bittul of a mesorah, that we lost that transmitting of the Torah, and that we lost the fulfillment of the Torah in Klal Yisrael. The purpose of this mourning is to lead us to the recognition, and that we should contemplate about the seriousness of the sin of these talmidim. Rabbi Kotler says, that this establishment of the mourning during Sfira, it's not only just to remember these hardships that happened during this time. Rather, the point of this mourning is to cause us an awakening that we should recognize and focus on the matter, how bad it is. How bad it is if there's no Torah in Klal Yisrael. This is worse than any destruction. And when we contemplate, when we think about the reason for the punishment of the talmidim of Rebbi Akiva, this will show us how careful we need to be when it comes to completeness of midos, of our good characteristic traits, proper etiquette, and derech eretz, especially by people who learn Torah. Because these great people, we see what happened from over here. Also the Mashgiach, Rabbi Cheskel, Levenstein, he said that we have to know that the obligation of this mourning is not just to be in pain because these righteous people died. Rather, this teaches us a lesson for us as well. How bad midos are, bad characteristics, how we need to be so careful. And therefore they were punished in such a severe way. Askara, this choking, one of the worst deaths. And even great people like these talmidim Rebbi Akiva, nevertheless, since they had a pagam, they had a blemish in their characteristics at their level, in their midos, Hashem didn't overlook that. They all got punished. Each one of us, we have to contemplate this and how careful we need to be with our midos, and to make sure that we are giving proper honor to people, especially talmidei chachamim. And when we think about this severe punish which was given, so then we're going to think about Zoi Mitros Yemei Sfira v'choivas on Hagos Avilos Bem. This is the purpose of Sfiras HaOmer and the mourning. Comes out that our avoda during these days is to strengthen ourselves with guarding the Torah, learning Torah, and doing it in a pure way as well. And to be careful with all of the ways to acquire the Torah. Because besides for the obligation to acquire the Torah, there's an obligation to guard the Torah and to transmit it to the next generation in a pure way. And we can learn out the seriousness of how we need to strengthen ourselves in respecting Rabbanim, Talmidei Chachamim, because the foundation of this obligation is based on the transferring of the Torah to the next generation. Because refraining from this and being lazy in this matter, a maniyah and a hisrashlus with the honor of these people, causes a pagam, a blemish in the transferring of the Torah, especially in Ikvasa de Mashiach. Right before Mashiach comes, when the Gemara in Sota Mem Tes says that the chutzpah's yaska, the chutzpah, the disrespect is so prevalent and common. We certainly need to strengthen ourselves by this, respecting older people as well, to keep the Torah in the pure way, to make sure that the transferring gets done properly, from the older to the younger, from Rebbe to Talmud, And then to connect back to Kabbalah Torah, Moshe Kibel Torah Messina Moser Yeshua, keeping that chain going. This is one explanation as to why they were fit to die, which is that it was a pagam, it was considered a blemish in mesoras hatorah. The Torah had to be completely pure. It had to have all 48 ways that the Torah is acquired. All 48 ways had to be utilized. They were missing the chaverim part. They were missing the dikdok chaverim. They were missing the pilpul talmidim. They were missing all of that. It had to be completely pure in every way, shape, or form. That's one explanation to the extent why they were sick. Because if the Torah is twisted and distorted, even in just one of the 48 ways that it's going to be acquired, that's enough to say all of the Torah, get rid of it. We don't need it at their level. Next time we'll learn about another reason why.